I'm going to show you how to make birch bark veneered fronts. These are drawers, so these would be for drawer fronts. Of course, you can use this method to apply the veneer to anything. These are cut from aspen wood, and they are going to go on a couple of gun racks that I've made. First thing you need is obviously birch bark. We cut these from trees that are down. We don't cut birch bark from live trees for obvious reasons. There are other videos out there on YouTube that can show you how to get the bark off the tree. And what we're going to do is, when we apply that veneer onto these drawer fronts, it's going to be right up to the edges of the drawers and maybe even overlap maybe 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch. So to start, we're just going to make it bigger. So we're going to need to take those pieces out of here. Now, the problem with birch bark is it wants to maintain the shape of the tree, and if I were to try to push this flat right now, it would probably crack. And also, even if I could get it to lay flat, it's likely that before any kind of glue would dry, it would pop back up. Even if I clamp it, it's going to want to do that, and it could do that after the piece is finished. So what we're going to do is we want to get this birch bark flattened out, and the best way that I found to do that is to steam it. When it gets real rubbery and pliable, then you're going to want to take it out of the steam, and then we're going to compress it between two pieces of plywood, and there'll be paper towels on each side of the birch bark to absorb the moisture. And then we're going to let that sit overnight, and that will get it flat enough to where we can start working with it to put it on these drawer fronts. Okay, so here I am with my setup to steam my birch bark, and as you can see, this is just a turkey cooker with a grate in it to keep the bark out of the water. Okay, so now you can see it's good and steamy, so we're going to go ahead and put this in there. And we're going to cover that up, and we're going to give it about 5 minutes of steaming. So it's actually been almost 3.5 minutes, and you can see how this is much more pliable, and you're able to work it some more. I'm actually going to use it, now that it's pliable, I'm going to use it to make my cuts for the drawer fronts. And then I'll come back and steam it again before I press it in the plywood. Okay, so you can see that this just came out of that steamer, and you can see how I'm able to now push it down flat without it cracking. And I'm actually going to, now that I've got it somewhat steamed, I'm going to cut it to the size that I want for these drawer fronts, which is obviously easier to do when it's not all curled up like it was before. So you can see that's going to work out just fine. That'll be well over that drawer, enough for me to machine it back and glue it down. Now, I'm still not done with this, because I'm going to, after I make all these separate pieces for these drawer fronts, I'm going to steam them all again and then press them overnight in the plywood with the clamps that I described before. So here you can see these are all the pieces that I'm going to use to veneer these drawer fronts, and you can see that some of them have flattened out quite nicely just from the little bit of steaming that I did to cut them. So I put these back in the steamer to get them pliable again, and now I'm going to be ready to press them. You can see I have a piece of paper towel down here. This one here is going to be the problem one. I have 3 that I'm going to press with this, and then I'll press that other one in a different press because I don't have room for it here. Just try and hold it down as best you can. Well, there you have it. And then we're going to let that sit like that. I usually let it sit overnight. I suppose you could let it sit for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and you'd accomplish the same thing. Okay, we've let this dry overnight, so let's see what we've got for this particular drawer front here. Okay, you can see that's nice and flat. And that's exactly what we want. And now we're going to glue this to this drawer front. And then after that we'll machine it back to its final dimension. We're using contact cement. This is the same contact cement you use for Formica. This is the solvent-based glue, not the water-based, so it is flammable and it has some strong vapors. I would normally be wearing a respirator, but obviously you couldn't hear anything I said if I did, so I'm just going to do this one drawer front because it's pretty much the same for all of them. Don't be shy with the glue. You're going to want these to dry for about 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, the glue is dry, and now we're going to be ready to adhere this veneer to this drawer front. This is the same glue as I mentioned before that's used for Formica. And one of the things, if you've never used that kind of glue before, you have to understand that the minute these two surfaces touch, that's it. You're not going to be able to reposition the veneer. So you have to get it right the first time. I'm going to cover the piece as best as I can. Okay, that's just right. Okay. I'm using a veneer roller here. This is something you should get. Does a pretty good job of getting that on there. Okay, you can see it's overlapping. Not so much on this side, it's just about right here. But it doesn't matter because we're going to go after this with a shaper table and trim off this edge, and then that'll be the final look of it. I wanted to show you how, because of the irregular shape of this birch bark, even after you roll that out and you glue it to the drawer fronts or whatever project you're doing, you're going to want to hit it with some clamps before that glue sets up too much. After the two surfaces contact, you still got maybe 5 to 7 minutes. And some of the places where the veneer doesn't want to lay down because of the irregular shape of the bark, you can help it out a little bit with some clamping. On some of these, because of these raised areas of the bark, after you trim it and before you machine it, you're going to get things like these bubbles because of this knot here, and the contact cement didn't hold it down. So what I'm going to do is come back after the fact and put some yellow carpenter's glue in there and then clamp that down and let that dry, and that usually will do the trick on those things before I machine the edge. Another tip and trick is when you have bark like this where there's a visible gap here, and if you put it down on the in this case the drawer front, you're going to notice the white wood underneath it. Trace the scar or the defect onto the wood and then fill it in with some, in this case I used black marker. You can use black paint, you can use even the same stain that you're going to do around the edge if it's dark enough, and it'll really kind of disguise it pretty well, and then you can use that piece of bark veneer instead of wasting it. Well, these are all glued up, as you can see, and now we're going to machine the edges to get our final look. Before you do that, you might want to take the real excess off so that you don't want to do that on your router table, shaper table, or on your table saw. So just take that, trim that excess off, like so. So here you see it after I've machined the edge on the shaper table, and you can see that it really cleans it up real nice. Those burn marks, you could either sand those out if you were going to keep the natural look of the wood, but I'm going with a really dark stain to really make this white birch veneer pop, really make it show, and so that'll cover up those burn marks. So here you can get an idea of what they look like with the darker stain around it, which really brings out the white birch bark on the front. I've set a drawer pull on this one, just set it on there so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like when you get the hardware on. And the cabinet that this is going into is also very dark to match this stain around the edge. So these drawer fronts really set out nice from that piece. Really look sharp. And at the end of this video, I'll show you a piece of the finished gun rack. It won't be this one, it'll be one that I did previously, but gives you the idea. Same thing. So that's how you do birch bark drawer fronts.